Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into Coralpalooza Digital 2020. I have with me now Jennifer Moore. She's the Protected Coral Recovery Coordinator and she works with NOAA Fisheries. So she's going to be presenting about some of the efforts that are underway right now in the Florida Keys to save some of the most endangered coral species that we have left. Jennifer?
Great, thanks Alex. Hello, and thank you for your interest in learning about stony coral tissue loss disease and how we are trying to respond. First, we have to answer 4 questions. Why are coral reefs important? Coral reefs occupy less than 1% of the world's oceans, but it is estimated that 25% of marine fish species inhabit coral reefs during some portion of their lives. Coral reefs safeguard against extreme weather, shoreline erosion, and coastal flooding, and help to form the sandy beaches and quiet lagoons that are signatures of Florida's tourism industry. Coral reefs in Southeast Florida are valued at $8.5 billion and create 70,000 full and part-time jobs. What exactly is the coral disease that everyone is talking about these days, and just how much of the Florida Reef Tract has been affected by this disease? The disease that has been affecting the Florida Reef Tract since 2014 is called stony coral tissue loss disease. And it is an infectious waterborne disease that has significantly impacted almost half of the coral species on the Florida Reef Tract. This disease has high rates of transmission and mortality. Once a coral begins to lose living tissue, observations show that the coral will die within weeks to months. The Florida Reef Tract is home to about 45 species of stony coral, and this disease is significantly impacting 22 of the 45 species. This disease has a high prevalence rate. What that means is that within a certain species, the disease is seen in 66 to 100% of the colonies that we see on the reef. Once a susceptible coral begins to lose tissue from this disease, as stated before, it is almost certain the entire colony will die within weeks or months. Over 80% of corals with stony coral tissue loss disease have suffered mortality. So how far has this disease spread? The Florida Reef Tract stretches approximately 360 linear miles from the St. Lucie Inlet in Martin County through Dry Tortugas National Park. It is one of the only barrier reef in the continental United States. In the fall of 2014, the disease was first observed near Virginia Key in Miami-Dade County. By the fall of 2015, disease was confirmed as far north as Pompano Beach down to Biscayne National Park. By the summer of 2016, the disease continued to spread north to Palm Beach County and south into the upper Florida Keys. And by the spring of 2017, reports of widespread disease were confirmed as far north as the St. Lucie Inlet in Martin County and the southern boundary of the upper Florida Keys. And from there was only one way to go, further down the Florida Reef Tract. And as you can see, it continued to march down the Reef Tract. And as of today, it is now west of Key West in an area called the Marquesas. And the only area that has been unaffected is the Dry Tortugas region. And stony coral tissue loss disease is not just a Florida problem. It has been observed in other areas of the Caribbean. Locations across the Caribbean have been documenting this disease since 2016 and include areas of U.S. jurisdiction like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It is suspected that the disease may transport by ballast water, and divers are also being advised to be cautious and disinfect gear between dive sites. With such a serious threat to our coral reefs, what exactly is Florida doing about this disease? Florida has developed a disease response network that is made up of 10 teams, a committee, and 2 dedicated full-time staff. And this response network has representatives from over 60 public and private partners. The 10 teams in the Coral Disease Response Network are researching the disease, developing interventions and restoration strategies, managing all the data that is being produced, and communicating with the public and our Caribbean colleagues about what we are doing to secure the future of Florida's coral reef. One of these disease response teams is the Florida Coral Rescue Team. So what is coral rescue? Coral rescue is a disease intervention strategy that is operating outside of the box at an unprecedented scale. So what are the goals of coral rescue? In July of 2018, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, and the NOAA Coral Reef Conservation Program hosted a coral disease workshop to develop a response plan. And during that workshop, we identified that there was a dire need to protect and preserve the corals that had not yet been affected by the coral disease. Therefore, we identified that we should start to rescue these corals off of the reef ahead of the disease front, where they had not yet been affected, to prevent them from becoming infected, to preserve the genetic diversity, and to propagate for future restoration. The Florida Coral Rescue Team is co-led by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and NOAA Fisheries, And team members are made up of representatives in academia and nonprofit organizations, and also the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. As part of the over 60 public and private partners that support the 10 teams in the Florida Coral Disease Response Network, the Coral Rescue Team is proudly supported by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or AZA, and their member facilities, non-AZA aquarium facilities, and marine operations and retail businesses. The biggest need identified by the team was to remove corals from the water in areas that had not yet been affected by the disease as quickly as possible, which led to the development of the Coral Rescue Collection Plan. The first step in the development of the plan was to prioritize which species we would rescue. The prioritization was based on susceptibility to the disease, the spread of the disease progression across the colony, prevalence in the whole colony of whole colony mortality, and other factors. The prioritization resulted in 16 high priority species and 6 medium priority species. Only medium and high priority species have been included in the collection plan due to funding, space, and coral care limitations. Lower priority species have not currently been shown to be as susceptible to disease and remain more abundant along the Florida Reef Tract. Also, there was a genetic management plan which is identified to make sure that when we collect these corals that we have enough genetic diversity to propagate those appropriately to create the next generation of corals. So to do that, we have to collect at least 50 unique individuals, or what we call genets, per coral rescue species. But we don't really know how to tell them apart in the field, and we still haven't developed all of the genetic tools to actually tell them apart even in the lab. So we actually have to over-collect and collect up to 200 corals per species to make sure that we're maintaining that maximum amount of diversity. So that means that we need to collect 4,400 corals in this rescue effort. The Coral Rescue Team acknowledged that one of the most considerable parts of developing the Coral Rescue Plan was to find facilities to house and provide high level of care for the approximately 4,400 corals that would be collected. Also, we did not have a huge budget, so this needed to be done at little to no cost. This is when the Coral Rescue Team identified the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or the AZA, as the only entity that had the suite of resources, expertise, and professionalism to take on this significant conservation challenge. So in August of 2018, the Coral Rescue Team solicited AZA's assistance with the Coral Rescue Plan. AZA established the Florida Reef Tract Rescue Project and hired a project coordinator and identified the Florida 4, which are the Florida AZA facilities that would take on the bulk of the responsibility for housing and caring for rescue corals. These 4 facilities are Florida Aquarium, SeaWorld Orlando, Disney the Seas, and Mote Marine Aquarium. AZA then developed a survey to identify interested AZA facilities nationwide and vet their ability to participate in this project. As of now, there are 18 AZA facilities in 12 different states that are holding our rescue corals. And this is the first time that the AZA professionals and resources have been sought out to assist state and federal agencies in responding to a marine environmental crisis, and has resulted in a national public-private partnership for the conservation and restoration of Florida's coral reefs. In addition to identifying and vetting holding facilities, the AZA has also established a set of advisory teams and working groups to facilitate communication, provide leadership structure for the AZA Florida Reef Tract project. And they're also providing coordination and expertise on how to care for the corals, including all the best equipment, food, medical care, and how to harness this amazing distributed network of zoos and aquariums across the country to tell the story of the plight of this disease. At the same time that the AZA was forming and executing their project plans, the Coral Rescue Team was also further developing and refining the Coral Rescue Plan. It started out actually even before we knew what the disease was by rescuing pillar coral. Pillar coral is on the endangered species list and was the canary in the coal mine. It was dying very rapidly from this disease before we really knew what was going on. So as early as 2016, Neely and Cindy Lewis launched a rescue of pillar coral due to its extreme rarity and high rate of mortality. This effort laid the groundwork for coral rescue. Phase 1 was a pilot collections of high priority species. These collections were conducted to test the protocols and for collection and transport, determine the staff and contractor resources required, and identify coral care needs. These corals were temporarily held at the Keys Marine Lab in the Middle Keys, and then they were ultimately transferred to the Florida Aquarium in Apollo Beach and Mote Marine Lab in Sarasota, and also the University of Miami. Phase 1 had a number of steps, beginning with single-day collections on small boats, and then the corals were transferred to the Keys Marine Lab for holding. At the Keys Marine Lab, the corals were sampled for genetic analysis, trimmed, mounted, photographed, and measured, tagged. We learned a lot about how to take care of these many corals all in one tank. Weirdly, this really hasn't been done before. Phase 2 is currently ongoing and consists of collecting all the high priority species and getting them into their longer term homes at the zoos and aquariums across the country. Phase 2 is anticipated to be completed just next month. After phase 1 coral collections, the rescue team knew that the collections needed to happen a lot faster and much greater volume than we were able to do in single day small boat collections. In order to cover the traveling distance need to stay ahead of the disease and maximize the number of corals that be collected and processed, transported to the intermediate facilities for holding, we decided to host coral rescue cruises. And during these cruises, corals were chosen carefully, removed from the substrate by divers, and put into mesh bags to be taken up to the boat. On board the vessel, the corals are sampled for genetic analysis, mounted and tagged, photographed and measured. And all of this is happening topside on the vessel while collections are still ongoing and while the vessel then steams from the collection sites near the dry tortugas up to the intermediate facilities at the University of Miami and Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. Approximately 250 to 400 corals were collected on each trip and transferred to the intermediate facilities. And once their more permanent homes were ready for them, the corals were carefully packaged and shipped across the country to places like Iowa, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Texas. The AZA refers to our corals as refugees, and their facilities are taking excellent care of them. And not only that, they are sharing their story with the public, either through displays or behind-the-scenes tours. And we are keeping on top of what we were doing through an online dashboard that tells us where the corals were collected, how many of them we have towards meeting our targets, and where they're being held. And this just in, we just completed another coral collection cruise, and now we have 1,640 corals in holding. But even now, as we are close to meeting our goals for phase 2, we are not done. We are planning for phase 3, which is the collection of the medium priority species. Because the disease front keeps marching forward, we may need to get creative and meet these goals and consider to meet these goals. And then we also have to think about the future and what does that hold for refugees? Phases 4 and 5 address future plans and will be conducted in coordination with the Florida Disease Response Teams Network and partners. Phase 4 is running concurrently with phases 2 and 3. There's a lot to be done to be able to breed these corals to create the next generation to be put back out on the reef. First, we need to figure out when is the right time to outplant to make sure that the corals we put on the reef aren't just going to get sick again. We need to develop a science-based plan on how to breed these corals so that we may maintain genetic diversity and make sure that they have the right genes that will make them able to deal with this disease and all of the other threats that corals face. We also need to expand and build new facilities and train lots of coral aquarists. It's not easy to get corals to make babies, especially when they're not in their normal home on the reef. This will all take some time, but we are lucky because we now have the parents safely off of the reef and being extremely well cared for. And then once we have lots and lots of babies, and we have determined that it's safe for them to be put back out on the reef, we can start conducting restoration of these species. We will need strong plans like the recently released Mission Iconic Reefs in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary to guide the appropriate locations to place the corals. We need to expand in-water nurseries to serve as grow-out facilities before these corals are ready to be put back on their reef and once again thrive. So thank you very much. We feel proud that Coral Rescue has been a wild success and will help restore Florida's coral reef for the future. Thank you for your interest.